Welcome to Fresno CityVision. I'm Randy Reed. In a previous edition of this show, we discussed the City of Fresno's strategy for dealing with the impacts of chronic homelessness on those who are homeless themselves, as well as the impacts on our community overall. The subject is far too complex for just a single discussion, so I've invited Greg Barfield, the City of Fresno's Homeless Prevention and Policy Manager, back to continue our conversation. Greg, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me again.
Now, Greg, the last time you were here, we talked about the scope of the homeless issue and problem in Fresno. We talked about what causes folks to become homeless and some of the strategies that the city is employing to address the issue, again, both from an individual perspective for those who are homeless, as well as how that impacts our city overall. Right. I'd like to talk a little bit about now how the community can be more engaged. What are the things that they can do to help? What are things that maybe they're doing that are not so helpful? And how we can work together to address this problem collectively.
All right.
Let's start with kind of a sensitive issue, and that has to do with encampments.
Yes.
Folks, that's the visibly part. That's the visible part of visible homelessness. Is a lot of times encampments that we see frequently in the downtown area, but I know they're in other parts of the city as well. Now, in 2009, the city undertook an effort to clean up a large homeless encampment in the downtown area, and I know part of that was intended to find stable housing for a lot of the folks who were living there. How did that process go?
That process, in the end, ultimately went very well. Okay. It was a pilot project that brought together the city, the Housing Authority, the County of Fresno, West Care, and Fresno County EOC to wrap services and housing around individuals. We were successful in housing 103 individuals in 72 scattered sites throughout the city. Another 29 got other supportive services or housing out of those supportive services. So a very successful process.
Okay, and how do you go about accomplishing that? For those who are homeless and don't have the means to secure housing for themselves, how did the effort at that encampment change that environment? How did that make it possible?
It was a very unique situation where over time we developed a relationship with the key leaders within that homeless encampment. And as a result of that dialogue, they were understanding that they wanted off. Many of the individuals were tired, were just looking for a hand up and not a hand out, and wanted to make a change in their lives. With that, and just knowing that the encampment, which had been there a very long time and on private property, needed to quickly wind itself down, also kind of helped, I think, bring closure to that particular camp. So the Housing Authority went out using some general fund revenue that we had at that particular time and leased a number of apartment units in its name and sublet to each of these individuals. The only caveat was you had to pay 30% of whatever your income was. So if your income was zero the day you moved in, you paid zero. And as your income increased, the desire was to have you pay 30% of whatever that increase was. Okay. We initially thought that we were going to have 4 months of services available to these individuals. It turns out that those folks are, at this point, still housed.
Okay.
You know, out of the 103, you know, over 90% are still housed. We're very thankful. Part of that was because the community contributed, too, to help in the supportive roles of those individuals. Okay.
And so what you're describing there is a situation where the folks who are being served are contributing to their to the improvement of their situation. Correct. It's not simply the government coming in and solving the problem for them. It's a collaborative process, even with those who are receiving the services.
Correct. There's got to be a desire by that individual to want to make a change, and that's the key thing. We estimated at the time we went in to start closing that camp, there were probably 150 people on the site. So there were some people who didn't want services. And obviously, at that time, if they didn't want services, they may have relocated or offended or done something else that we couldn't keep track of. But for those individuals who wanted to step forward and have some kind of life-changing event, it's been very successful for them. And we think that that's a model that we ought to continue to follow.
Okay, and that is one that I know that has been, you've been continuing to reach out to folks who are living in these encampments and providing them access to services and resources. I know that's something that you do almost every day.
Yes,
okay.
yes.
The encampments themselves, I know they seem to grow over time as they get established, and more folks tend to move towards those areas. Does that create problems for the folks that are living there as well as for the community as a whole?
It does. For those individuals who are living on these unimproved lots in this, it creates health and safety issues that may come out. There's no place for the waste, and there's no place for the trash. Mm-hmm. It also does not create a sense of how do we get out of here. It more isolates individuals. And then from the surrounding neighborhood, it creates, of course, blight and an eyesore, and additional calls for service or resources may also have to come into play. The best thing that we could possibly do is to help house someone versus these temporary encampments that are out there. Typically with an encampment, there's not a lot of services that are wrapped around it unless it comes to someone's attention. And at that point, you've got a lot of calls for service. There's a lot of substance abuse or alcohol consumption that may occur on these sites. And for someone who is just trying to survive, some of that is about self-medicating and trying to get through and cope through the day. But if we can provide a stable, housed environment for that person where they can clean up and store their belongings every single day and then reintegrate back into society, whether it is going out to do active job search or whether it is going back to school, that's far better and far cheaper when it comes to the community resources that are out there.
Okay. I know in some cases there are folks who are living in the encampments and maybe homeless in other situations as well, that they're lacking even the basics of identification that would allow them then to at least start moving through the process of services that are available to them. And so that's another thing I know that you and the folks that you're working with are trying to overcome as well, to again bring folks to the resources that are available to them.
Correct.
Okay.
Many of our service agencies, whether it's Catholic Charities, Poverello House, EOC, do have the ability to help an individual get ID or birth certificates. And particularly in the state of California, it's much easier than for an out-of-state resident or individual. But if that is the only barrier, that is, it's a $7 voucher. The Poverello will provide the voucher part, and that individual just needs to have $7 to go out and get ID.
And that can be the first step.
And that could be their first step.
Okay.
If they take that big first step, that unlocks the door to other services out there.
Okay.
And we want to make sure that they understand they've got to take a step, and we're going to take a step with them.
Okay.